they're theme park rides. They're only kind of movies. And I think that's by design. Actually, I don't think it's by design. I know it's by design because one of the people who wrote a bunch of the movies told me that. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. Like Aaron Kruger told me, was like, oh yeah, Michael Bay doesn't care about a lot of the stuff that you think you're supposed to care about when you're making a narrative movie. He doesn't consider his competition to be other movies coming out. He considers his competition to be Disneyland. And so that's what we're trying to create. And it was kind of like, click, unlocked. Oh, I get it.
Hello and welcome to the Box Office Podcast. This is Rebecca Pahle, Deputy Editor of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition since 1920. I haven't been on the podcast here in a while. For anyone wondering if I have been fired by Daniel for not having seen all the Rocky movies, I have not. We will be hearing from Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, in our feature segment, along with Box Office Studios' Romeo, Duchene and Russ Fischer. They will be recapping the box office history of the Transformers franchise. But leading into that, it is myself and Box Office Pro analyst Jesse Rifkin. I did not see anything over this past weekend because I recently moved, so I was going through all the hell of that. But I do have my ticket coming up for the day that this podcast is coming out, for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which is, of course, the main box office story that we'll be talking about in this episode. But before we get to that, really quickly, we do have a couple of news items. One, AMC Theaters has joined with Vudu, which is owned by Fandango, to be their official streaming platform. And secondly, Regal has also made a deal, this one a 10-year deal with National Cinemedia, a long-term advertising agreement that certainly comes as good news for the company after it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in April. In non-Spider-Verse news, at this past week's box office, we had horror film Boogeyman, not really holding up to the horror films are doing great. Horror films are overperforming with a $12.3 million debut, ranking it in third place, just behind the second weekend of Little Mermaid, which had a drop of about 57.5%. But I mean, all everyone's talking about is, of course, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I mean, I've heard amazing things. I've tried to kind of stay off and not see a lot of it just because I know I'm already going to see it and I don't want to get my expectations too high. But Jesse, a lot of people did see it over the weekend. What are we looking at in terms of box office?
Well, $120.6 million opening weekend. That is the number 8 highest opening weekend of all time for an animated movie. So we're talking an excellent opening weekend. It opened 3.4 times as high, more than triple as high as its 2018 predecessor, which was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. On that opening weekend for Across the Spider-Verse, it earned 63% of what its predecessor made total. Like, by the time you're listening to this podcast, we're recording it on Monday, and if you're listening to it when it comes out, it's on Thursday. It'll be real close to surpassing.
Yeah, but by Thursday, it'll probably be somewhere around 80% of its predecessor's total. And I anticipate that by the end of its second weekend, it will probably have matched or eclipsed its predecessor's total after just 2 weekends. So what is it likely to drop in its second weekend? Well, again, its predecessor dropped 53% in its sophomore frame. So we're probably looking at somewhere around that here, maybe even a little more, just because it's going to be losing out a lot of the IMAX screens with its higher ticket prices to Transformers Rise of the Beast, which comes out this weekend.
I mean, it already has crazy word of mouth. That definitely helped with the first one. And my money will be in there getting it to the same box office that the first one had its first 2 weeks, which is insane. Jesse, and internationally, what are we looking at? Because I know with the first one, there was a bit of a weird situation of Into the Spider-Verse opened higher internationally than it did domestically, and then later on it kind of switched. What are we looking at this time?
The comparisons are a little apples to oranges because the original one had something of a staggered release. For example, on its opening weekend, it did not open in China on its opening weekend. This time, its opening weekend did include China. So for that reason and a few others, it's hard to compare exactly. But this one had an international opening of about $88 million for a total global opening weekend of $208 million. So for comparison, that means it's already earned 55%, more than half, of its predecessor's global total just in its opening weekend alone. That's really, really impressive.
That's great. And speaking of China, Jesse, looking at some of these figures from IMAX, where the film earned $20 million on its first weekend in IMAX, the second biggest animated opening for IMAX of all time. 2.7 million of that was from China, which took in 16.5% of the box office for that weekend on only 1% of the screens, which is, I mean, I don't even know if we can say it's crazy or it's unexpected at this point, given how well premium formats, including IMAX, have been over-indexing. But I mean, you love to see those statistics. We're now entering the summer movie season where, Jesse, as you mentioned, we're going to see a really kind of rapid turnover of those IMAX screens. I mean, Spider-Verse is not getting 2 weeks, really, because this upcoming weekend, it is going to Transformers Rise of the Beasts, the 6th or 7th film in the Transformers franchise, depending on whether you count the spinoff Bumblebee. So yeah, I mean, if you want to get out and see a Spider-Verse on premium formats, maybe do it before the Thursday previews start tonight.
In fact, the new Transformers will only have 1 week on most IMAX screens too, because only a week after that, The Flash is coming out in IMAX. So a lot of these films only have about 7 days in which you can really catch them on the biggest screens.
Well, I bought my tickets for the opening weekend for Oppenheimer in IMAX 70 millimeter, and I thought I was getting them early, but by the time I got there a few days back, it was like pretty full already. Granted, that's like one of a very, very small number of theaters screening it in that format, IMAX 70. But like, if you want to see something in ScreenX and ICE and IMAX and any of those premium formats, don't sleep on it because you're going to miss your shot. And speaking of Transformers Rise of the Beasts, in our feature segment, as mentioned at the top of this podcast, we do have Daniel Loria, Russ Fischer, and Romeo Duchene breaking down the box office history of that franchise, which is a franchise that was really hugely influential in kind of crafting the modern ecosystem of box office, where international take has really become more and more important. For those interested in this film and the franchise, you can also go to boxofficepro.com to check out Daniel's interview with Stephen Caple Jr., director of Transformers Rise of the Beasts. Please stay with us for that breakdown of the Transformers franchise after this break.
And we're back here on the Box Office Podcast in our feature segment, going over the box office history of the Transformers franchise leading up to this weekend's release of Transformers Rise of the Beasts, coming to movies nationwide and in a lot of overseas markets from Paramount Pictures. We've got here Romeo Duchene from the Box Office Company and Russ Fischer, the editorial director of the Box Office Studios, a division of our company which provides editorial services for movie theaters. I spent last weekend watching 10 Fast and Furious movies for the first time. I spent this weekend watching 6 Transformers movies for the first time. Woo! I mean, this seems like a Super Size Me remake of just watching like global franchises that I hadn't seen. It's a very Morgan Spurlocky experiment that I'm going through. Let's start with this, with like general recollections of putting both of you guys on the spot. Let's start with Russ here. How would you describe the Transformers franchise for someone like me 2 weeks ago who had not seen a single one of them?
They're theme park rides. You know, they're only kind of movies. And I think that's by design. Actually, I don't think it's by design. I know it's by design because one of the people who wrote a bunch of the movies told me that a number of years ago. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. Like, you know, Aaron Kruger told me, was like, oh yeah, Michael Bay doesn't care about a lot of the stuff that you think you're supposed to care about when you're making a narrative movie. And he's like, he doesn't consider his competition to be other movies coming out. He considers his competition to be Disneyland. And so that's what we're trying to create. And it was kind of like, click, unlocked. Oh, I get it.
And that's what these movies are competing with that, essentially. So we're not really stacking these movies to other films or other examples that are out there. We're stacking these movies to a visceral experience of enjoying spectacle. The only difference is you're enjoying the spectacle from the comfort of a movie theater seat with nice air conditioning over the summer.
And I got to say, I mean, I was a preteen in the early 80s when the Transformers came to the US, when the cartoon debuted and the toys. There was no bigger fan of the Transformers as a child than I was. I was super, super into it. Like, that was the post Star Wars thing, kind of, was Transformers for me. I loved them. I watched the cartoon, I had the toys, the whole thing, but I haven't necessarily carried that into my adult life.
On the contrary of you, Russ, I never actually played with the toys, and I remember when the movie with Shia LaBeouf released in 2007, I was actually the perfect audience because I was in high school. I think I had the same age as Shia LaBeouf at the time, so I built a lot of empathy for this character, thanks to this generational stuff. So yeah, total different experience, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how we look at these movies and our experience watching it and our connection to this IP, this intellectual property. I remember seeing pictures of like my first 6 months as a baby, and I'm lying down on a Transformers branded comforter. So it's all the little Transformers toys, and there I am, a bald baby, just lying down. These pictures are in my house, and that was my connection. I guess I didn't grow up with the series or the toys as I got older, but yeah, that early to mid 80s cultural impact that these toys had, I think it's not unfair to say it didn't really carry through. There are other Hasbro toys and properties that didn't also make it past the Saturday morning cartoon of the 1980s, never really transitioned into anything else. But at the same time, guys, they weren't really packaged to do that. I think the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were able to do that as a Saturday morning cartoon / toy / feature film from a studio trifecta. Hasbro didn't figure that out. And when we go back to the mid 2000s, when Hasbro decides to enter this partnership with Paramount Pictures to bring adaptations of their properties to theaters, that was the model, right? The Saturday morning cartoon to toy to major blockbuster route. And it's not an easy thing to accomplish. I mean, listen.
They've really struggled with G.I. Joe, which seems like it should be a slam dunk. Like that, you would think that G.I. Joe is the easiest movie franchise to make out of any of them. And they multiple times have completely bombed it. They just haven't made it work. And that's despite having like some good talent. You had Channing Tatum, you had The Rock, you had, it's like they did that Snake Eyes movie. Was like the character when I was a kid, Snake Eyes was the coolest because he was like a ninja who didn't talk and he dressed in black and everybody was like, oh, I'm playing with a Snake Eyes toy. And they granted that movie, when it hit at kind of the wrong time, but they just, again, they didn't make it work.
Well, there's, I think, also historical frames of reference here on why it was hard for Hasbro to develop that property in around 2007, right? Namely, the US's involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, 2 wars that were difficult to sell within this country and much harder to sell outside of this country. The brand of American Army guy fighting, the super society of villains,
like Reagan era remake of a Korean War era kind of hero thing it's and yet, I mean, arguably, like the Fast and the Furious movies are just the whole G.I. Joe character set, but kind of you've seen this thing of like this code namey character set doing a thing, fighting a cabal of mysterious technocratic villains or whatever. It's like, it's kind of the same stuff, structurally speaking. You were correct. I mean, the real context around something like G.I. Joe makes it way harder to make and sell that movie, especially overseas. Like, why does anybody in China want to go see G.I. Joe movie? And the answer is nobody does.
And that, I think, is what leads Hasbro and Paramount Pictures to develop this concept, which by all intents and purposes is a harder movie to pull off. Transformers instead of G.I. Joe as the first collaboration. We have to get something straight here. As Russ points out, these movies are competing with theme park rides. They are about talking robots that turn into cars. That's what we're working with here. That is the context of the conversation. But I challenge anyone, write a feature film script or make a movie with that IP of just like, hey, this is a robot, turns into a car, it has to talk. You have to deliver a satisfying film 90 minutes plus based on that. That's near impossible. I don't know how you get there. So that is the challenge that we have in front of us. We have the challenge of making robot talking cars into something that you can buy and care about and feel about. Basically, the challenge that we have here is that how do we turn this concept into a global blockbuster series? And it's not as easy as it seems. I hadn't seen a single one of these movies. I think I've said several times now, until very recently. I was in film school focused on other things. So watching everything now, kind of like we did with our Fast and the Furious franchise, were the same. I hadn't seen any of those movies, but you go back and you see how these global franchises are built. I think it's very telling in how audiences and how Hollywood speaks to a global audience and how that sort of evolves. For Transformers, I think just because I've got these Fast and Furious movies fresh in my mind, I think it's a different beast altogether. There are movies like Fast and the Furious that I've seen. There is a version of every Fast and the Furious movie out there that I would like better, that is different, that makes different creative decisions. I can imagine that movie. That's not the case with Transformers. There is no other version of Transformers that is a frame of reference. There's no other talking robot car movie. There are sci-fi movies that you can basically benchmark, but this is its own thing. So when Steven Spielberg signs on as executive producer and Michael Bay signs on as director, that teaming brings up, I think, a lot of interesting questions as moviegoers. Russ, do you remember where you were in life when this came out? Do you remember when and how you saw this?
I mean, the idea of seeing a Transformers movie, which is something I had a connection to when I was young, produced by Steven Spielberg, directed by Michael Bay, someone, whether or not you like Michael Bay's movies, somebody who has a voice. I mean, Michael Bay he's got a style, he has a voice. You see a Michael Bay movie and it's like, oh, that is a Michael Bay movie. I know what I'm watching. And I think that brings a lot to this. I think a lot of the reason that these movies, especially the first couple, are watchable is Michael Bay. You know, they look great. They look awesome. Some of this, especially the beginning of the second movie, Michael Bay's preference to film actual locations and actual things brings a lot to these movies, and it gives them weight that I think they would not have in the hands of other filmmakers, because Bay goes and puts the camera in real places, and consequently, even though it's like CGI robots, it's still there's something to look at, and there's something that like feels like it's happening, and that gives these movies a quality that they wouldn't otherwise have.
Now, Romeo, you watched these in high school. Do you remember the marketing campaign in France for the first Transformers? You're at the prime movie-going age for this. What was the cultural context of this movie's release?
The cultural context, well, yeah, I was 16, probably not very aware of the cultural context in my country at the time. I was probably more focused on who I was going to date and bring this woman to the movie theater, rather than the cultural context. But I do remember being very skeptical about watching robots and car speaking. But I remember I was a huge fan of The Island. I know it's a controversial movie, but I was a huge fan of this one. I remember when Transformer released in 2007, it was, like I said, it echoes a lot to my teenager souvenir. I was like the same age as Shia LaBeouf at the time. And I remember there is one scene in Transformer, which is every teenager's dream. He's in a car with Megan Fox in a tunnel, and Megan Fox is asking Shia LaBeouf why Bumblebee is transforming himself as a crappy car, since he can transform himself in like basically everything. And Bumblebee is like so mad they get Megan and Shia LaBeouf out of the car, and then Bumblebee came back with like this very nice yellow Camaro, and I was like, this is the perfect every teenager dream. I mean, that was like my sequence. Nice.
Listen, I'm not going to say that wasn't probably part of the appeal of this movie for teenage boys. Megan Fox, Camaros, robot fights.
Pretty straightforward.
Do you need anything more? Yeah, and the movie leans into it, and I think let's go into everything behind it, because the Spielberg and Michael Bay collaboration, I don't think, is as emphasized as much as in this first entry in the movie. The original Transformers film here in 2007 very much feels like two different films that are working in parallel tracks until they come together in the third act. The first movie is a big, loud, dumb Michael Bay movie. And there is no one, in my opinion, in the world that is better at making big, loud, dumb movies. Obviously, I went to high school in Miami, so Michael Bay is very much a Miami guy. And I think there's no filmmaker that embodies Miami more than the Michael Bay ethos and what he brings to his movies. That's half of the movie, right? The big robot war movie. The other half of the movie is a boy and his car and dating a girl that is way out of his league movie. That's the Spielberg movie. And that movie works really, really well as well. I think when you look at those two ingredients and how they're put together, how they're balanced in a screenplay that works very well, how Bay is able to integrate those two storylines in a way that the boy in his car and the girl out of his league movie is charming and appealing and engaging and drives you in, really helps sell the, hey, how did that car turn into a robot? And wait, it's fighting other robots part of the movie. That by the time you're in the third act, everything is clicking. The action is wonderful. The characters work. There's an appeal here that Transformers, the original in 2007, I think gets absolutely right. This franchise never gets better. It never gets that ingredient mix just as correctly as this original does. And I think it just goes down to that. It's that Spielberg movie. It's that Michael Bay movie. And Russ, one of the things you bring up here is that there are other Steven Spielberg produced films that are a little bit in the DNA here. You know, Spielberg was involved with Gremlins, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, Spielberg, Gremlins is an Amblin movie. Spielberg was producer on Gremlins, an active one. And I mean, a lot of the first Transformers movie and even stuff in the second and third feels like Gremlins with robots to me, especially looking at it now. And kind of the ways in which, you mentioned there's two movies. There's a boy in his car movie, and then there's the giant robots action movie. And the way those things come together is very Gremlins in a way. It's like you've got the Decepticons as Gremlins, you've got the Autobots as Mogwai. They're a lot bigger. They're not cuddly little teddy bear creatures, but the thinking, like the jokes and the structure of scenes and the whole approach and the blend of comedy plus like a weird fish out of water and all of those elements are very, very reminiscent of Gremlins, a movie I've seen 50 times. And watching Transformers again, I was like, oh God, this is just Gremlins, with Shia LaBeouf.
There are other little aspects, I think, of that Spielberg influence here as well. E.T., which is a movie about an alien coming in and you're hiding it in suburban U.S. That's where this movie's based. That's Shia LaBeouf, Megan Fox storyline. You get an alien car from outer space and you kind of have to hide him. You kind of have to integrate him. There's a high school bully out there. Man, that aspect of the movie, I was surprised just how well it worked. And there's also a little bit of a horror tinge to the action, specifically around some of the characters. Reminded me a lot of Gremlins. Yes, a little bit of Poltergeist in the way that technology is used as a horror foil to the straight characters and the straight setting. So you can see that DNA of that Spielberg influence very, very much here in the original. Once we get into the sequels, I think it's the Michael Bay show, which works if you know that that's coming. But I wasn't expecting a movie like this one when I watched the original. Let's go over the numbers here real fast before we continue talking about the film. Romeo, what did this movie open to over in July 4th weekend here in North America in 2007?
The movie opened around $70 million in the US for a domestic box office of $320 million.
Not bad. Global box office went up to $709 million, really off the strength of the overseas market, making $390 million. So pretty well balanced here. 45% market share in North America, 55% outside of North America. Once again, this is before the overseas box office goes through that revolution with digital cinema. Let's speak a little bit more about the movie itself. I think it's, as we mentioned, it's a screenplay that works a lot better than I expected it to. It's a movie that is well balanced within these storylines. I can tell you I am a huge fan of easy to the point exposition whenever your plot is ludicrous, and the idea of alien robot cars is just an impossible idea to sell. Keep your exposition light, keep it simple. First 5 minutes in this movie, Optimus Prime in disembodied voice tells us there is a magic cube that's in Earth, and alien robot cars need to get the cube. What is the cube? No one cares. It doesn't matter. They don't have to go into it. Nobody needs to know. That's within the first 30 seconds of the movie. Then you have a wonderful scene in Qatar, of all countries, where the U.S. Army fights robot scorpions, which looked amazing. It looked like something I had never seen before, and that's something that you will hear me say again and again. And after that, we're in a high school narrative with a surprisingly charming Shia LaBeouf, a breakout role from Megan Fox, who hits all the right notes in this film. Yeah, I mean, really, 7 minutes in, I'm in the bag, guys. There's a cube, there are robots, there's war, there's a charming movie. I want Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox to get together at the end. It's a movie about a boy and his car, and also giant robots fighting soldiers. How could you not be drawn into this? It's really hard to pull that off in 7 minutes.
Let's not forget the first Transformers had two Oscar nominations also for best sound editing and best visual effect. And I have to say, the sound editing is just awesome. When you see slow-mo scene of robots fighting, the sound editing is just on point, and it's just it's fascinating to watch. It's just overwhelming.
Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci, who were guys who were TV writers, they started off on Hercules, The Legendary Journeys movie, a TV series, which, important to remember, produced by Sam Raimi, which led to Xena Warrior Princess. These guys were TV mainstays, like genre TV mainstays for quite a while, and they wanted to break into features. And they got their break rewriting the John Rogers script for Transformers. And like, this movie makes them, they are minted as writer-producers with this movie. They're involved in the sequels. And then they do the Star Trek reboot. They branch off and do all sorts of other things. They work with Spielberg to create that script that you like. Like, the John Rogers draft, my understanding is it was pretty different. It was structured differently, and Spielberg came in and was like, "Hey, let's do the boy in his car story." And they were like, "Bang, love it, great." And that's where all this stuff comes from. And then also, Daniel, you kind of threw out a little semi-disparaging aside about Shia LaBeouf, but like, look, man, Shia's good. And honestly, Shia's worst enemy is Shia LaBeouf, because I think this is somebody who was on track to be one of the most powerful and most effective actors of his generation. He is very good. He's a Disney kid. He does a Disney TV series. He does that movie Holes, which is like the closest thing to like a 2000s Goonies reboot. Yeah, Shia did Disturbia. Which was, at the time, I loved it. I saw it like 3 times when it was out for some reason. Or actually not for some reason. It played at the drive-in in Atlanta, and you could just watch movies. Talked about this before. There was one night where I watched Disturbia twice in a row. Had a great time with it. Haven't seen it in a long time. Does it hold up? I don't know. At the time, terrific stuff. And like, Shia had problems. Shia's problems got in his way and really did a lot to derail him. And I understand that. And it's unfortunate because he's good. Like, he's a good actor. And I think he's still going to be a good actor. I don't know if either of you guys saw that movie, The Peanut Butter Falcon, which was an indie. I think it was a Sundance movie he did in 2019. It's a good movie. He's great in it. It's like he's still doing good stuff. American Honey, he's good in that. Fury, which is a movie I have some issues with, he's good in that. It's like he's a good actor, and a lot of the reason Transformers works is because of Shia LaBeouf.
And this is Shia in his leading man era, right? He's also cast as Indiana Jones's son in the 4th Indiana Jones movie. There is this window where Shia LaBeouf is going to be your next leading man of this new crop of franchises. I agree with you, Russ, in the sense that his personal life maybe gets in the way of his career, but I will defend, like you, his career. I think his choices are really interesting. He takes decisions and he works with filmmakers. He takes roles, commits to them fully. He's not afraid of going on big movies. in 2013, in the middle of this like Transformer stardom, he decides to play a very, let's say, not empathetic role in Lars von Trier's Nymphomaniac movies, and he completely delivers in those movies. He's great in them. He keeps on taking roles that are challenging and does well in them. And you're right. I think the charm that he brings in the first Transformers works. Let's not forget about the charm that Megan Fox brings. There's a reason why she is a breakout star. And yes, I mean, she is a very attractive person to look at in this film, but she's got a personality, she's got a presence, she's got a chemistry. I think the role is interesting enough for her to deliver here in a way that Megan Fox's career, I don't think, maybe she wasn't given the roles to go there.
I think that's fair to say, in that I think a lot of people had a difficult time seeing beyond the like Maxim cover vision of Megan Fox, and perhaps beyond the Michael Bay vision of Megan Fox, where, like, to be fair, Michael Bay's camera looks at Megan Fox in only one way in these movies, you know?
And in the way that a 16-year-old boy would look at. But it's the whole thing about the Michael Bay School of Directing is Michael Bay looks at the world the way 16-year-old boys look at the world. And if you're a 16-year-old boy, do Michael Bay movies work. And then when you're older, it reminds you of who you were at 16. Now, of course, that's also a huge flaw. You have another half of the global population sitting through these movies going, oh boy, I have to spend time with this character, but I will defend within that framework. That's why we go back to the screenplay, because this screenplay in Transformers gives that role a little bit of extra depth, a little bit of extra stuff to do, to work with in a way that, right. I mean, I don't think Megan Fox's career ever escaped the male gaze.
Well, I mean, I think the one exception is Jennifer's Body, you know, the horror movie
coming from a Diablo Cody screenplay,
directed by Karen Kusama, you know, and it's like, that's a great movie. It's a great casting for Megan Fox. That movie works really well, and that movie has really had a resurgence over the last 5 years or so. You know, people who sort of dismissed it at the time have realized that Jennifer's Body is a good movie. Beyond that, Megan Fox has not been able to really capitalize on a career in the way that, you know, maybe she would like to. I don't know. I can't assume what she wants, what she doesn't want, but you know, I think she's had a hard time moving beyond that Michael Bay and Maxim vision of who she is / who they expect her to be.
And it feels like a time capsule of these two young stars, LaBeouf and Fox, at the cusp of a stardom that ends up taking a different shape than maybe a lot of us would have assumed it would have, right? LaBeouf decides to do different things with his career. Megan Fox decides to do different things with her career. But in this movie, in this original Transformers, you've got that moment. And I think that moment of them together and that chemistry they have is wonderful. And it's something the franchise always aims for after this movie, never gets to, never successfully delivers. It's a movie that the supporting cast, I think, works really well in. You've got the grumpy army guy played by Jon Voight. You've got John Turturro playing John Turturro, but in a way that kind of works. And then you've also got Rachel Taylor playing she's an Australian actress playing some sort of super intelligent science person. She does a great job. I think her character is sorely missed in the sequels. She helps drive the exposition here in a way that really helps the movie keep on going and keep on flowing. In the sequels, all the lines that the Rachel Taylor character can bring in with personality end up getting shouted at you by some sort of soldier.
Right.
It says, what is that? Oh, it's a giant robot. No, in this one, at least, you have Rachel Taylor in a scene getting you through these expository moments, you know, explaining and guiding you through the plot. Again, I think this is for what Transformers, the concept, wants to be, this is the best possible film version of that concept. And that's why I would call this a great movie. That is the context of this.
The one place I want to push back on that, and this is the thing that hurts these movies, and that for me, even the first movie is not a great movie, because as soon as the Transformers are on screen and they're not fighting, I don't care. There's nothing.
That's a great point.
This movie does nothing to make me interested in them as characters, and they're toys, but they never rise above being toys. You know, one of the best decisions that was made was to bring back some of the voice actors like Peter Cullen, who voices Optimus Prime. Like, the dude has been the voice of Optimus Prime for a long time. His voice is great. It's an awesome voice. And every bit of appeal that Optimus Prime has in this movie as a character is because of Peter Cullen's voice. There's nothing in the script that gives me any reason to be even vaguely interested in this character. And as soon as it's just like Transformers talking among themselves, I do not care at all. I'm so bored by it.
Russ, you have to stay at the end of every Transformers movie because he's doing a monologue at every end
know, yeah.
of the movie. I mean, promising us the next one is going to be even more awesome.
Yeah, he's so good. Other voice actors, I mean, not all the voice actors are good, but, you know, and that just brings in a whole bunch. It's like, again, these are not trying to be narrative movies. So there's a lot of questions that come to mind for me that these movies are not even vaguely interested in answering. But there are all these dialogue scenes where they're talking about like, oh, the history of the Transformers as a species. And I'm like, okay, just wait a second. Like, hold on.
No, this is 2 hours and 47 minutes long. We don't need this right now.
And I know I'm demanding something this movie does not want to provide and is not meant to provide. And I get it. And that's why ultimately these movies are not for me. But when it's just about robots, they're so boring to me. Like, just stop the robots talking. I don't care. I'm not interested. And I think that's the thing that becomes progressively more a problem as the way that they try to sell these movies is to add more robot characters. And so ultimately it's just more and more robot characters that I don't care about.
I think that's a really good complaint, I think, of these movies. But to be fair, the first one doesn't let you stay in these robot dialogue
it doesn't linger
scenes too much.
That's right.
It doesn't linger in that. I think the sequels absolutely do. And you get into trouble when you try to make sense of alien robot cars. When you try to make sense of that Adam mythology, the first one just tells you, listen, there's a cube, there's alien robot cars looking for the cube. The good guys are called Autobots. The bad guys are called Decepticons. They're going to fight. That's what you've got. You got to find the cube.
Yeah.
Anything beyond that, I think, is flawed. And I think anything beyond that is part of what a lot of these big global franchises suffer from. At a certain point, mainstream cinema, big studio franchises stop being movies and start being world building, start being everything beyond a movie. And you can do that with Marvel superheroes that have long backstories and like decades and decades of writers and writer rooms that you can draw from. You can't do that with toys, man. You're going to be bad at it. There's no way to pull it off. The first one knows its limits. The first one knows what you're there for and sticks to it. The sequels, once we try to turn this into the Transformers cinematic universe, that's where the entire thing falls apart. I agree with you. I don't care about a single one of the robots, but I care about the human relationships. I care about John Turturro. I care about Megan Fox. I care about Shia LaBeouf. And it's the same thing as the Jurassic Park movies, right? It's great to see the dinosaurs, but you can't really expect to get much of a connection from your engagement with a T-Rex. That's the spectacle. You need to have the cast work on its own. The first Jurassic Park got that right. None of the others did. And that's why we have that franchise. I think the same thing works here.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, again, like you, I love John Turturro. I don't know how many kids he has. I hope these movies put them all through college and bought him like 3 houses, or maybe he financed a weird movie with it. I don't know. I hope that's how it went, because that's what these things are for to a certain extent. And that's great. We all understand and accept that. And cool. That's, John Turturro's character gets peed on by a giant robot in the first Transformers movie. He should get a house for that,
Price of admission, man.
That's
Price
it.
of admission. I came to watch robots fight and a robot pee on the guy from Sal's Pizzeria. That's what I bought a ticket for. And by the way, I bring up that Do the Right Thing reference because it feels like there's a universe here that Do the Right Thing and Transformers coexist, where John Turturro's character from Do the Right Thing leaves Brooklyn and that pizzeria and turns into this guy. That's how I like to think of it. And I think really there's a lot of similarities in the performance there. Just think about it. Let's use that as a transition going into the sequel here. And there's a very specific constraint here that the sequel deals with. We're going to go into that in a minute. The sequel, released on June 24th of 2009, is Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. Romeo, could you give us the domestic opening weekend figure for this? Because this is where we see those grosses start to creep up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it opened at above $100 million in the US, exactly $109 million in the US, accumulating its box office for the domestic market around $402 million, with an international share of 52% for Transformers 2. China becomes the second market for Transformer, with this iteration reaching almost 8% market share with a $65 million box office. So going from 37 to 65, so almost double is lifetime grosses in China for the second iteration. Yeah,
and that's going to be, I think, a theme of these movies, just to see how these overseas markets respond to these titles, especially as they become more available through the inception of digital cinema overseas. Interesting thing to bring up here, Russ, as we're recording this, we're in the middle of a writer's strike. This is a movie.
Hopefully we're in the middle of now. Hopefully this is not still the beginning of a writer's strike.
We are all hoping we're near the end of it.
Yes.
But yes, we are in a writer's strike. The last major writer's strike that happened during the production of this film. And I think an easy way to see of how the writer's strike disrupted this crop of blockbusters is just looking to see what happened with the James Bond franchise with Daniel Craig. In 2007, you have Casino Royale come out, rebooting the series, introducing a new Bond. Casino Royale may be the best Bond movie ever made. If it's not the best, it's in the top 3.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It reinvigorates the franchise. It's a movie that does everything it wants to perfectly well. I'm speaking of it in very similar terms in the way that I speak about Transformers, released in 2007. The sequel, Quantum of Solace, in 2009, suffers from not having writers available to work on the script, to help tweak the script. And I would argue so is the first Transformers sequel, a sequel that I think suffers from a lot of the issues that Quantum of Solace suffers from. You don't have writers to help bring these characters that you really connected with in the first movie, to help develop them. Everything just seems to be in service to robots fighting, which is fine. That's what we pay money to see. That's okay. But it's a different movie altogether. And as you mentioned, Russ, this movie, when it just relies on robots telling you robot mythology that was made up on the spot and telling bad jokes to each other, that's when these movies feel long. That's when these movies don't work. And I think that's the major flaw here in the first Transformers sequel. Megan Fox is back, but
not for long.
Not really integrated in the script at all. Shia LaBeouf is still, I think, the central character here. Josh Duhamel is back as the army guy from the first movie. But again, these characters were, I think, had stakes in the first film. Those stakes aren't here. Josh Duhamel's character as the soldier in the first 5 minutes of Transformers 1, you know that he has a new baby girl and he has to fight this foreign war. 2007, a U.S. soldier fighting a foreign war that he shouldn't be fighting to go back to his family. Dude, that works very obviously, and that works and grounds your character in a very simple way. The story of a boy in his car with Shia LaBeouf, with a relationship with Megan Fox, that works. None of that is here. They're just characters saying things to lead to the next big action sequence. The action sequences work, but the movie loses its heart in the human characters, and the robot characters can't make up for it. Certainly not during a writer's strike.
Yeah, I came back to see the second one, and again, very overwhelmed by the number of explosions. But I wanted to bring a fun fact, and I'm very surprised that this is a Frenchman that bringing this fun fact. But Transformer, the sequel, is the very first movie to announce the election of Barack Obama. I don't know what you guys want to do with that information, but I do think it's important.
But that's an interesting point, Romeo, in that this movie, rather than giving us fake made up countries or maybe like an alternate universe precedent, they go to lengths to bring in actual people from US media, actual politicians, bring in actual countries. It helps ground, I guess, the action of this ridiculous concept a little bit more. The sequel here is set in college. You've got Isabel Lucas playing a model that is introduced as a romantic rival to Megan Fox's character, that turns into, and I didn't know this, she turns into a hot girl transformer that wants to kill you. And there's some body horror elements in this movie where the movie just goes in so many different directions. So you've got a hot girl Terminator transformer played by Isabel Lucas. Shia LaBeouf gets haunted by the ghost of Transformers. So there's like a horror movie where he's seeing visions. There's a college plot where he's in college. What's going on here, Romeo? What's going on? Are we getting ahead of ourselves?
Guys, let's go back. A transformer transform into a human shape. So how on earth they didn't do that for the first one? I mean, the whole time.
Turn every Transformers into Isabel Lucas to go like honeypot every like stupid man out there. It's a 37-minute movie. You'll get that cube in no time.
This is what I'm talking about, where you can't ask questions about how or why the Transformers do these things because there's no answer unless the answer is specifically in service of the plot that the movie in question is trying to drive. And then the sequel will totally disregard that and be like, every time they do one of these movies, they establish some stuff and then the next movie rewrites it or disregards it. And in a way, that's fine. I don't care. Like, I've said this before on this podcast. I'll say it until I die. I don't care about some perfect narrative cohesion. If it works, it works. I think the problems are, as we've talked about, there are parts of these movies that don't work. And so I just sit there and ask all of these questions. If the movie works, then it's like, who cares? It doesn't matter. Just like run with it.
There's so many moments in this movie where it tries to be a comedy, it tries to be a horror movie. There's a Terminator movie hiding in the background of this. There's a Gremlins sequel hiding in the background of this movie. I just don't know what it wants to do. Just give me the meat and potatoes, Michael Bay. I know you can do sweet, sweet robot action. Just give me that. That's fine. Whenever you try to do more, it doesn't work, especially when you don't have writers behind it. That's what happens in this sequel. This sequel, I think, hurts the franchise. I think the fact that, a lot. I think the fact that you lose the Rachel Taylor character that helps you get out of narrative problems very easily in the first movie. She's completely written out of this movie. That's a huge loss because all of a sudden you have to have more explanatory dialogue from characters that it doesn't really work very well. You have more moments between robots talking to each other, cracking jokes and funny voices. That's not what I'm here to watch.
Nope.
I will defend moments like the robot honeypot scene when a supermodel that is impossibly out of the league of Shia LaBeouf tries to seduce and kill him. That looks awesome. That's great. Give me more honeypot killer robots. I want that. I want to see robots fighting humans. I don't want to see jokes. I don't know. This movie sucked. This movie was awful.
Actually, the audience felt the same way at the time because the first one had a great audience score of 85% and dive to 57% for the second one. So it's the start of the disappointment for the audience.
So let's not talk about this horrible movie any more than we have to. It made a bunch of money. It was actually the number one film domestically of 2009. It was the number one film in the domestic franchise here for Transformers. It ended up making, as Romeo said, over $400 million. That's the height nationally. Internationally, however, this turns into a whole other ballgame with the third entry in the series, Transformers Dark of the Moon, released in June 29th, 2011. Once again, July 4th weekend. Romeo, what are the financials here? What's the opening weekend? What's the market share? How does this play out for audiences?
Yeah, so the opening weekend was a bit less than the second one, with $100 million shy, and the domestic box office went to $352 million. But this is the very first Transformer movie to cross the $1 billion threshold, with $1 billion and $123 million worldwide. So with almost 70% of its box office outside of the US. So that's definitely the start of a story for overseas box office for the Transformer franchise. And China represents almost 15%, going from $65 million for the second one to more than $165 million for the third one.
Now, we were talking about how the writer's strike and the bad script, I think, really derails a lot of the characters, a lot of the heart in this franchise, maybe takes some of that potential away. How a similar thing happens to the James Bond series. Now, the difference here is that for the third installment of the James Bond series, the Bond producers bring in Sam Mendes to helm Skyfall, and Skyfall, by every metric, I think, overperforms in expectations, both financial and narrative-wise, in that series. This third installment in the Transformers franchise gets as close to that as possible, but doesn't quite land it. This is the last one that I really liked, and I did really like it, but all the issues in the sequel are still here. The action works better. I think the scope is grand. We'll get into this in a second. But Russ, do you remember watching this on the Paramount lot?
I was kind of excited for this movie because there's this whole conspiracy theory aspect of it. Like, oh, the moon landing was actually, a secret mission to investigate a craft that had crash landed on the dark side of the moon and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of fun. We're just way in the weeds when it comes to like caring or not caring about like story and continuity. And indeed, I think this movie really carries forward like what would, like you said, it's like the problems from the writer's strike movie, which are that there's just total disassociation between scenes. And here it's almost like an art movie. It's almost an experimental movie in the way that it just like does whatever the hell it wants. So I do remember seeing it. I remember the press screening and being kind of looking forward to it. And ultimately, this one doesn't work for me any better really than the previous one did. It's nice to have, like, it's a bummer that Megan Fox is gone. Backstage, comments and feuding and politics meant that Megan Fox was out, which is too bad.
Well, that's I think the main issue that the writers have to contend with in this third part of the franchise, where the first part works really because of the human characters there. Josh Duhamel is given these human stakes of being a family man, having to go back to his family. John Turturro is your comic relief, and he's like the super secret funny guy working in a back room in the government. And then you've got that romantic pairing between two great young actors like Megan Fox and Shia LaBeouf that just seem fresh and happy and look great on screen. You lose all of that development in the sequel. So when you go into this third part of the trilogy at this point, where these characters have to pay off an emotional journey, you've lost an entire 2 hours of running time from the sequel. And then you've already lost Megan Fox, and you have to rework that character and recast that character with Rosie Huntington, who does a good job, but it's a new character. And all of a sudden now you have to do the heavy lifting of explaining very vaguely what happened to the Megan Fox character, which is a huge part of the first two movies. And then just grounding the stakes of this movie between Shia's relationship and his new girlfriend, another supermodel that this character ends up punching well above his weight to get with. God bless him. You have to sort of kind of explain that relationship and develop it. It doesn't have the running time to do it when you're balancing robots fighting each other. It's really hard to tell that third installment in character development with these issues working against it. I think ultimately what this movie had to do to work, and I hate to say this because she was great in the first movie, you have to Karate Kid 2 Megan Fox in the sequel. In the first 10 minutes, nobody would ask themselves why. First 10 minutes of the second Transformers movie, do what Daniel LaRusso does in Karate Kid Part 2. This girl was way out of my league, and she dumped me for a soccer player. And you don't ask any more questions. You're like, you know what? Elizabeth Shue is way out of your league. That makes perfect sense to me. If Megan Fox doesn't do enough in the sequel, you should have written her out. I'm sorry, but she's not given enough of a character to be in that second movie. So by the time you get to the third one, you can reestablish something. Again, I think narrative lessons from the Karate Kid trilogy, there's a lot you can take. Very underrated films.
Agreed. Yeah.
But let's go into, I think, what works here. Of course, we are complaining about character development and motivation. That is not the reason why anybody watches these movies. And that is definitely not the reason why these movies are billion-dollar earners, starting with this one. Guys, this is where Michael Bay's career peaks. He has never directed action that looks better than this. So I'm watching all of these movies over the weekend, and my wife is walking around just having to contend with the noise from the television. And she keeps on coming up to me and goes, Daniel, you keep on saying, wow, awesome. Like you keep on doing this. I just hear explosions and you just yell out, wow, awesome, or like cool. I reacted viscerally to this movie so many times. That's hard to pull off, guys. I came in very jaded to these movies, but if I keep on reacting this way from watching it at home, it means it's working at a very simple level. And yeah, I mean, the action set pieces are incredible. I've never seen a big dumb action movie taking place in a city, a big battle like I see in the third act, the hour-long third act of Transformers: Dark of the Moon, where you have Autobots and Decepticons and army guys fighting in downtown Chicago, just wrecking Trump Tower. It's so entertaining. There's like a vagina dentata robot worm that like crushes buildings that is awesome to look at. I loved every second of this. It looks great. The effects still hold up today. I don't yell out "wow, awesome" when I watch Marvel movies. By the way, only when I watch something like this.
I mean, Marvel movies don't shoot on location in Chicago. Certainly not anymore. And even at the time, Bay doing all this filming, all the location work in Chicago, and just having like explosions on the streets, it was notable then. It was a big deal. It wasn't like, oh, people do this all the time. It was a big deal that Bay was doing all of that location work. And it certainly pays off. I mean, I think this movie looks good. I think there's not a whole lot that looks like this movie. And certainly now when you see, like, I think the only people, I'm going to eat these words later, but in my mind, without researching it, the only things that come close to this or that exceed it in terms of like looking like this action location shooting, on this scale are Fury Road, which Rosie Huntington-Whiteley went off to film just after this movie came out. And then some of Chris Nolan's movies. Nolan does that location work in the same way that Bay is. And it's almost like they're, it's probably an exaggeration to say that like Nolan and Bay are like Beatles and Beach Boysing each other at this point where they're like trying to outdo.
I think that's fair. Yeah, it works. You know what? I'll bring in another movie. I think there's some James Cameron in this. There are sequences here that remind me of True Lies. This is that third act, in Chicago, once you see this wonderful spectacle of robots. I'd never seen something like that before. And I haven't seen a third act like that executed anywhere nearly as well in any Hollywood blockbuster. This nails it. This is, I think, the best example of how you pull off this sort of spectacle. Unfortunately, because you don't have that second movie to tweak your characters, to help out the motivations, there is no emotional payoff at the end. The emotional payoff here is structured to be the Rosie Huntington-Whiteley character and Shia LaBeouf coming together. That's supposed to be how this trilogy ends. It would have worked with a Megan Fox character who has like a chip on her shoulder in the first movie, and she's interesting to spend time with. In the third one, Rosie Huntington-Whiteley's character is just a damsel in distress. She's the hot girl to fight over with like the tech billionaire. She's just, and we hear these complaints a lot, but she is, I think, such a retrograde character, and she's just the trophy that you have to protect, that you have to win.
She's almost a MacGuffin, It's like...
Yeah, and it really doesn't work. The character just does not work.
Yeah, and that's not her fault as an actor. It's the way it's written.
Not at all.
But, the writing does not support her, doesn't give her anything to do. There were a lot of complaints that she's not very good in the movie. And it's like, well, look at the material she's got. She's not given really anything to work with.
But when we stick to the spectacle, guys, again, this movie, that third act of this movie gives me the feeling that James Cameron movies give me. I've never seen this before. No one can do this well. And this, I really do think when we look back at Michael Bay's filmography, there's movies I like better. Of course, we will talk about Pain and Gain in a second. I love The Rock. There's movies I think that work better as standalone movies. But in terms of sequences, this is the best Michael Bay, I think, has ever been doing Michael Bay. Russ, earlier when talking about this movie, you mentioned the supporting cast that works really, really well here. You've got Frances McDormand, John Malkovich, John Turturro is back. They basically got a Coen Brothers movie.
Kind of.
Put robots in it.
Yeah, totally.
And you know what? The Coen Brothers ensemble is wonderful. They really give this movie a lot of punch and personality that I think, is charming. It's just a pity, again, that the second installment just didn't work, that you lose Megan Fox, you lose her character to the point where it just, you don't get that weight of the final moment that the original trilogy should close out with. And I do call it an original trilogy because the first three movies in this franchise feel like a self-enclosed trio with a beginning, really bad middle, and decently good end. That would have been perfect, I think, to go out on. I think Michael Bay probably thought it was going to be 3 movies of his life.
I think Bay even explicitly said he was not going to do a 4th movie, and then for whatever reason he did. But yeah, I think when Dark of the Moon is coming out, I think that he's like, yeah, I'm done. I did 3 of these.
We're good.
Hand wiping gesture. Let's go do something else.
But of course, this movie makes $1 billion worldwide. And if there is a guarantee in life in Hollywood, is if you make a $1 billion movie, there is going to be a sequel. Sorry, that's just what's going to happen. Now, Paramount does convince Michael Bay to come back for the 4th entry in this franchise, but they do a one for me, one for you trade-off with a movie that I think we all like very much, Pain and Gain.
Yes.
Again, Miami, probably the most iconic Miami movie ever made, based on a wonderful, wonderful source material, great article from the Miami New Times titled Pain and Gain that I very much encourage everyone to read. I think it's a great movie. It brings together Mark Wahlberg and The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, in roles that are interesting or challenging. And then when Transformers gets a soft reboot with its original director, Michael Bay, in Transformers Age of Extinction, which comes out over July 4th weekend in 2014, it comes with a new star. Now, I don't know how you guys feel. It ends up being Mark Wahlberg, but honestly, would this movie have worked better with The Rock? I don't know. It feels like a toss-up. You lose Shia LaBeouf, you're going to bring in franchise Viagra. You better bring in Mr. Franchise Viagra himself, because I'm not sure Marky Mark pulls this off. Let's start with financials, and we'll go into the movie. Romeo, how does this perform at the box office?
Well, very similar to the third one. So again, crossing the $1 billion threshold, accumulated at the global box office $1,104 million. It opened at $100 million in the US. Quite similar as the second one and the third one also. But we're still observing a decrease in terms of box office for English-speaking territories. And for the first one, this is the very first time China becomes the first country for the franchise, reaching almost 30% of the global box office from China with $301 million. Crazy. Russia still strong with $45 million, second market after the domestic market with $245 million.
Yeah, big shift here in the overseas box office that keeps on rising and rising. You make a 4th installment after the prior one makes $1 billion. This one also makes $1.1 billion. But as you mentioned, for those people that can understand the dialogue without subtitles, it's oh boy, it is not working. Russ, how did you feel about Transformers: Age of Extinction?
Didn't like it.
There we go. I don't think anyone did.
That's
everything.
That's all I got for you here. That's all I got.
I mean, you have to save yourself, Russ, because the next one is the worst in terms of audience score. Okay.
Well, I didn't see the next one. I didn't see the next one because I was like, I'm out. I'm done.
Yeah, you did well. The one that comes after this is one of the worst movies I've seen in my life. This one's not far from it. So this is what happens in Transformers: Age of Extinction. You end up finishing off that trilogy storyline with Shia LaBeouf and those human stakes. You try to reboot everything in a post-war torn Chicago narrative universe here. For whatever reason, there are still robots throwing tech MacGuffins at you. Is it a sword? Is it a laser? Is it a, I don't know, sandals? I don't know what they're looking for, but they're looking for it and they have to fight. That's fine. Don't spend too much time talking about it. The longer you spend explaining the plot, the worse it will be for everyone involved. They spend way, way too much time giving you robot alien mythology. But there are things that work in this movie. First off, we go back to the human stakes. Mark Wahlberg plays a Texas mechanic with a Boston accent. Don't ask questions. That's fine. Everyone's watching this is reading subtitles anyway. He's got a supermodel daughter that is dating an Irish race car driver. I didn't know there were too many Irish race car drivers. Sure. Why not? TJ Miller is there playing an out-of-work mechanic that gets killed off. Spoiler alert, who cares? He gets killed off like 40 minutes into this movie and like no one cares. He gets like burned alive and everyone's like, kind of sucks for TJ Miller.
So it's like the real world.
Going. I think what the movie tries to do is ground this new iteration of the franchise with Mark Wahlberg's relationship with his daughter, played by Nicola Peltz. It ends up being kind of boring and doesn't really go anywhere, to the point that the daughter character gets written off of the next installment in this franchise. None of the human characters work.
I do remember just thinking that everything, like they kind of do, they try to structure this kind of like, coming of age comedy triangle thing with Wahlberg's character and his daughter and her boyfriend. And I just remember all of the scenes between them being weird and creepy, and the stuff with like trying to negotiate, is it okay if like the boyfriend and the daughter have sex, or I was like, no, none of this. Get all of this out of this movie.
So cringe.
There's a whole subplot here about like the daughter being 17 years old and the boyfriend being 20. And like age of consent in the state of Texas.
Right.
You don't need to get into that, man.
Yeah.
It's a movie about robots fighting. We can go into age of consent in another film.
It could be called Age of Consent. Although, like Transformers Age of Consent, very different movie from Transformers Age of Extinction, which is the title of this movie. I don't know if we've ever mentioned it. But yeah, that's the thing I remember about this movie is all of that stuff and me just being like, no, don't want.
No, way, yeah. It doesn't. It makes you want the robot characters to come back.
Can the robots talk more?
That's how bad this movie is. That's how terrible this movie is. There's also, you get into the obscene product placement part of the Transformers universe,
which is always part of it from the beginning.
Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, if a Bud Light scene is going to bankroll a great third act like we had in the third one, I don't care. That's fine.
Happens
the third
all
act
the time.
Works. Drink all the Bud Light your little heart desires. I have no issue. But if you're going to spend like 7 minutes on Bud Light commercials for a pretty crappy movie, that's where I'm like, come on, man. Spend it a little better way. Supporting cast kind of works here. TJ Miller does his thing. He works, for the 40 minutes he's there. Kelsey Grammer's a bad guy, and is actually pretty good.
Nice
as
idea.
The bad guy
yeah,
here.
Sure.
Yeah, no, it worked really well. You've got Stanley Tucci here as well, playing a morally compromised like tech guy. He's also great. Everybody likes Stanley Tucci. Again, when it gets to like the casting and bringing in interesting character actors to like fill out your movie, this movie works really well. But as we were saying earlier, maybe spend less time in robots talking about their super secret alien mythology and Irish race car drivers talking about sleeping with underage models. That's not the movie I want to watch. Ultimately, the movie I do want to watch is less good as the other ones. Action still works. A big part of this movie is set in China. Of course, there's a reason for that. Romeo went into it. The Chinese box office is booming. This is a massive, massive franchise in China. It gets to the point, this is how cynical this is, that there are speaking roles in this film that there was a Chinese reality show that just played in the country, where the winner of this Chinese reality show got to have a speaking walk-on role in the Transformers
movie.
sequel, in Age of Extinction. That's where we are in the Transformers universe. You're servicing things that are beyond a movie, that are beyond a storyline. And it is a movie that doesn't work for those reasons.
That Chinese aspect is something that is worth maybe going into a little more detail about, because that's the thing we saw in a lot of movies in this time. There was a period of about 4 years where any movie with a budget like over $100 million, you could virtually guarantee was going to have like a scene egregiously set in China. Occasionally a movie would even reach the level of like virtually being a Chinese America co-production. And some of it now just like it's not hard to watch, it's just weird to watch some of those films. Even a movie like The Martian, which is a movie
that's probably
adore. I love that movie to death. But then all the China thing just seems very consciously like, let's make this movie able to play in China. And some of that was just to get around Chinese laws about the distribution of movies that were not made in China. And so like you're courting Chinese audiences with characters and scenes that are set in China, but you're also specifically courting the Chinese government to let you put your movie in theaters without being subject to regulations that limit your box office potential. And this is the prime era for studios being like, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll set a whole act of the movie in China because that's how we can get access to that box office.
You know what? I don't have an issue with saying, hey, listen, this is the top global market for this movie. Like China is the top global market for movies like this. Why don't we shoot there? Why don't we make a movie that audiences from this country will like? I get that. I support that all the way. I love it. When it gets cynical and kind of weird, and I think The Martian is the best example, is when you're just having characters say monologues that are clearly set up to impress a foreign government's officials.
There's propaganda aspect that's kind of sketchy.
I don't know. Whatever punk rock teenager I have left inside me is still like, go Buñuel Viridiana, and just like a big FU to like the Francoist Spain censors. I like that. I like when you insult government censors, not when you kowtow to them. It doesn't work in a single one of the movies that does it.
No, I mean, we're talking about this though, of course, in the context of Transformers movies, which are like, they're perfectly happy to be U.S. military propaganda. They're perfectly happy to be propaganda for General Motors. So where's the line between also throwing in like a little, a couple of, big ups to China? It's just so egregious. It feels very shoehorned in, and it's not limited to this movie. There's a bunch of them.
Right.
And now that era has kind of passed, it feels even more glaring when you look at some of these movies now.
There's a way to do it effectively. The way you don't do it effectively is by raffling away speaking roles in your film. That is how you turn this into a cynical enterprise. So yeah, I think you're right. There is a way to do it. It isn't this. But beyond that, I don't want to turn this into a whole like, oh no, American blockbusters aren't made for Americans anymore. Newsflash, they never were. It's good that you make globally appealing films. There is nothing wrong for making movies that appeal to foreign audiences. But yeah, it's just the way you go about it. Maybe pay a little bit more attention to it, because it did not work here. But who cares? I mean, $1 billion movie made a bunch of movie in China. This is the top grossing movie in the franchise in China. I wonder why. It did great. I don't think there is much of a story left. I think, as Romeo mentioned, the English-speaking territories are coming out less and less for these movies. But as we said before, if you make $1 billion at the box office, you got to bring another one in there. And I don't know how they did it, but they brought in Michael Bay for the fifth and undoubtedly worst in the conversation, I think, of the worst movies ever made, Transformers: The Last Night, released on June 21st, 2017. Romeo, what are the financials here? Because this is where everything goes off the rails.
Oh yeah, this is where the big dive starts, definitely. So the fifth one, Transformer the Last Night, reached $605 million at the global box office. So going from 1.1 billion to 605 million, big dive. Opening in the US was $40 million. So again, going from 100 to 40, and the domestic box office was 130. So going from 255 to 130. Regarding overseas figure, China still first, but down. So down from 301 to 228, but reaching almost 40% of the market share for this Transformers movie on the international scene. So, and the big drop also coming from Russia, going from 45 million to 15 only.
Yeah, I mean, it's a movie that audiences just don't sign up to in the same way. Not only here domestically, as you mentioned, you go from making 245 million domestically down to 130 million domestically. You go from overseas making 858 million down to 475. If the last two movies in this franchise make 1.1 billion and this one makes 605 million, yeah, you're going to get worried. And I think after this movie comes out, Paramount takes a long, hard look at what their plans are, at how they're going to keep on approaching this concept in the future. But let's go into the movie that completely derailed the Michael Bay universe of Transformers movies.
I did not watch this one because I was like, wait a second, there's like Transformers and Merlin. And this is like a soap opera one, right? Because doesn't Optimus Prime become a bad guy?
Yes.
And
yes, that happened. He's brainwashed. He's robot brainwashed by another robot to be a bad guy called Nemesis Prime for a good hour of the movie.
Which on paper I love, but then in reality you get back to that my point from a while ago, which is just I don't want to hear the robots talking, and those two things don't really go together very well.
Yeah, Romeo, do you remember where you saw this movie? When you saw this movie? I mean, you're working in the film industry at this point, right? Or are you at Sony or Universal in France?
I was at Universal Pictures, so I was more focused on the Universal lineup. But
you were competing against this.
Yeah,
when it
exactly.
Comes out.
We were competing, but I remember I really wanted to watch this movie only because in the previous iteration they introduced Dinobots. So I was like, I just want Dinobots again. So I went to see it, but honestly, no, I don't think I remember a single piece from that moment when I've seen in theater. But yeah.
A very forgettable movie. I think there's a chance you guys might have seen it and just have forgotten about it. There is a very high likelihood that it happened. I'm just gonna rattle through this because the less we talk about this awful thing, the better. It starts with a very promising opening sequence where it looks like we're watching Michael Bay doing a medieval war film. And I'm thinking, awesome. I'm going to watch this movie called Transformers The Last Night, and there's going to be knights, and there's going to be medieval battles and robot horses. I don't know. What wonderful treats are in store for me. But they abandoned that maybe 10 minutes in. They just that movie starts and ends within 10 minutes. Stanley Tucci comes back playing Merlin in painfully unfunny sequences that really lead nowhere. Apparently, Excalibur, King Arthur's sword, is something that robots created, or maybe they want. I don't know. It doesn't matter. They're trying to get some sort of weird medieval technology. Anthony Hopkins is here playing Anthony Hopkins. They kill him off an hour and a half in. It was actually kind of cool. Again, spoilers, who cares? If you care, get a life. 90 minutes into this thing, there's a battle sequence set in Stonehenge where Transformers blast Anthony Hopkins into smithereens. It's impossible not to start laughing when you see that. You get to a point where these movies have robots that are clear callbacks to Star Wars. There is an R2-D2 ripoff. There's a CP3O ripoff. They tell jokes. The jokes aren't funny. There's also a plot line here in the first hour where there's a bunch of children in war-torn Chicago looking for spare parts, helping Mark Wahlberg, I don't know, repair robots. They get thrown away about an hour into this movie. You don't really hear about them anymore. There's jumping, there's explosions, there's bad dialogue. There's a couple robots that reminded me of the ED-209 from RoboCop. They show up on the screen for about a minute and a half and then disappear again. I was kind of disappointed with that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to go with this. It sucks in every conceivable way. Every line in this movie tries to universe build. Every scene is in service of creating a spinoff on a character or setting you up on a sequel or a prequel. And between that, you've got Bud Light product placement and undeveloped female characters. Josh Duhamel comes back. John Turturro comes back. Inexplicably, if you bring in characters from those movies and you don't bring either Megan Fox or Shia LaBeouf, it kind of feels incomplete. Why even go through the trouble? They don't. Maybe they tried. Who cares? Really, just an abysmal film. People don't really go back to watch it in the same numbers. Paramount at this point is a studio that is not looking too great. All the IPs that they had in the late aughts, they don't forget they had the Iron Man movies.
They distributed. I mean, they were, Paramount. Yeah. And that's the thing. This movie is made when the Marvel Cinematic Universe is really going, right? And everybody is trying to make that. And clearly Hasbro and Paramount see Transformers as their potential Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so you can kind of understand why they're doing all this world building, but they're clearly missing the point. They've had, they had distribution of Marvel movies, which they lost ultimately. They've got the Mission movies, but those take forever to make. Those are not quick productions. They're not really getting Star Trek off the ground. They've had a Star Trek reboot that people like, but Star Trek as a cinematic exercise is all but, I think at this point, like, is Star Trek Beyond already out when this movie comes out? I genuinely don't remember. But I mean, the Star Trek reboot universe that was set in motion by Kurtzman and Orci, the guys who ultimately wrote first Transformers movie, that is all but stalled. Yeah, Paramount's really trying to figure out what to do.
And the Hasbro partnership just isn't working, guys. You have a couple of G.I. Joe movies that got released between 2009 and 2013. That doesn't work at all. They have to abandon that. Again, a ready-made franchise. You give a little bit of time after the onset of that Afghanistan-Iraq war to try to launch it. Guess what? It's really hard to sell U.S. Army guy movies overseas unless you're Tom Cruise fighting vague fighter pilots from a country that nobody knows about. You try to launch Battleship in 2012 based on a board game. That doesn't work at all. I mean, really, this big partnership is just Transformers. That's what Paramount has right now. Other properties, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles gets rebooted. That doesn't work either. Paramount is really, really struggling to have a compelling IP to compete against the Disneys and Universals of the world. They go all in on Transformers, and I think it gets mismanaged because they get ahead of themselves. They try to make this cinematic universe in a movie that's just like way, way, way past its prime. It doesn't work at all.
They don't have that central character hook. You've got Mark Wahlberg's character coming back, but I don't know that anybody cares about that character. And his daughter, the daughter character is not even in this, right?
Written out entirely. Those are the stakes in Age of Extinction. Like, the central human relationship is Mark Wahlberg and his apparently sexually available 17-year-old underage daughter that he has to protect from Irish race car drivers. You just abandoned that entirely in this one.
And granted, I mean,
we were calling it surplus,
right?
When we talk about the last movie, that's fine. But then you have nothing left. It's just Mark Wahlberg running around with a sword.
Yeah, you don't replace it with anything. And I mean, as we've discussed here, these movies really do hinge on having some kind of character relationship at the center of them. Like, that's what that's the axis on which these movies turn. And if this movie doesn't even have that, then, like, what have you got?
There's nothing left of the Spielberg influence. This is Michael Bay at his worst. I don't think he'll make Pearl Harbor was awful, but this is just abysmal. I don't use the word object to describe too many films. I will use it to describe this one. The less talked about this abomination, the better. It derails a franchise. It's a franchise killer. That's what this is. It is a franchise killer. Paramount needs to go back to the drawing board and figure out how you revive this. And they actually, to their credit, pull something off that is, I think, overperformed in every way, shape, and form, but not at the box office. Of course, after this movie, Paramount decides to go with a spin-off based on the Bumblebee robot, which you mentioned, Russ. Throughout 5 Transformers movies, you don't really build a connection to any of the robot characters. You do with Bumblebee. Bumblebee is the one exception. Yeah. It's the one thing you got going on for you. And they decide to take everything that worked in the Spielberg half of the first Transformers movie and expand on it in the 2018 release Bumblebee. Spin-off starring Haley Steinfeld.
Also a Coen Brothers veteran, made her, her first big role was in their Coen remake of True Grit.
Yeah, she was great in that. She's great in this. And this movie decides to get a divorce from the Michael Bay-ness of these movies, which is fine. I think he peaked with the third one. You get 2 extra ones just in case you wanted to get more of that. I think after 5, both Michael Bay and everybody else is ready to move on. It's good that happened. And you've got Travis Knight, who is a filmmaker. Well, how would you describe Travis Knight and his trajectory, Russ?
Well, it depends on,
because he's not your first choice, right?
He's not, but Travis Knight is interesting because how you describe him, you could describe him in a couple of ways. I mean, he's the son of the co-founder of Nike. So Travis Knight does not come from nothing, But on the other hand, Travis Knight is also the founder or co-founder and one of the main animators at the stop motion studio Laika, which has made wonderful movies. And they make them in a way that is amazing. But he had wanted to make a transition into live action for a while. I think there was maybe a point where he was looking at one of the Deadpool movies, or, there were some places where it was like, oh, what's his live action debut going to be? And it ends up being Bumblebee, which, as you say, is kind of a weird thing because it's a prequel to the 2007 movie. And it's kind of a remake of it as well, because it takes the boy in his car part and makes it a girl in his car, and it's the same car. But then they also get to throw in some 80s nostalgia with a lot of music. The Haley Steinfeld character is super into music. I don't know. I think this movie about 2/3 works.
Yeah, I think it's a good reset. Unfortunately, the box office doesn't really help this movie in terms of, we're always going to speak about it in context to the other Transformers movies. I always insist that it's an unfair comparison when we bring in spinoffs, especially a spinoff that is very far away from what the Michael Bay Transformers movies did. This tries very consciously to be a very different Transformers movie. Romeo, what are the numbers for Bumblebee, released in December of 2018?
I like what you said, Daniel, about the context, because we need to highlight that the distribution plan for Bumblebee, especially for the domestic market, was clearly not the same compared to the previous iteration that were above every movie before that from the Transformer franchise were above 4,000 locations in the US. And Bumblebee opened
July 4th weekend, big holiday weekend, big summer movie. This is released in December. How wide was that release here domestically?
3,500 location. So it's a notable drop compared to the previous iteration. And regarding box office, the dives continue, but I have to say I still see some sparkles. Sorry, some old spark somewhere. Sorry for the bad joke. It opened in the US above $20 million. Continue his career and ends around $127 million in the US exactly, with an international market share of 73%, grossing almost $500 million, 467. So the dives, like I said, continue going from 605 to 467. China is still the first country with 36% market share, but a decrease again going from 228 for the last Transformers to $170 million for Bumblebee. But when I said I see some sparkle somewhere, for instance, the UK increased the box office for this one. So And let's not forget that this one and the first Transformer is the best audience. Well, it's the best audience score. They have the best audience score from the franchise.
I think audiences didn't know what this movie was. I think the audience that you need to make a $1 billion movie didn't know this is a Transformers movie. This needs to be called Transformers: Bumblebee, and it's not. And I think that if you make that one change, this movie goes above 750 at least, because that mass audience that just goes to see a Transformers movie because it's a Transformers movie didn't go see this because they didn't know it was a Transformers movie. And then you get into the thing of like, well, wait, what kind of Transformers movie is it? Is it a reboot? Is it a prequel? And it's kind of trying to be multiple things at once. And I think that hurts it. Because I think the worst parts of this movie are the parts that connect it to the other Transformers movies, because it's where it doesn't feel very organic. Like the stuff with just the Haley Steinfeld character and Bumblebee, that stuff works pretty well. It's entertaining, it's lighter, but it's like, okay, I like this. And then all the other stuff where it's like, oh, younger versions of the John Turturro character and all the other world building stuff is pretty flat. As soon as you're doing this stuff like a version of a thing that Michael Bay did, like, sorry, you're not outdoing Michael Bay at like the big Transformer battle stuff, and it doesn't feel anywhere near on the scale of what Bay did. And consequently, despite the fact that it's crazy expensive and this huge thing, it feels kind of small and chintzy, and I think those are big, big problems that this movie faced and failed to overcome.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was a marketing challenge that wasn't well handled with this film's release. I think at a certain point for me in this movie, I realized that this is a movie made that I could watch with a kid.
Yeah.
This is a very good movie to watch with a 7-year-old.
Totally.
In a way that I'm not sure any of the Transformers sequels are great movies to watch with 7-year-olds.
Hell no.
You try explaining to them about underage relationships in Texas. That's just not going to fly. But this is specifically a movie that a 7-year-old kid can watch with you, and both of you are going to have a really good time at the movies. How do you market that? How does that exist within this universe? It's a challenge that isn't completely solved within both the marketing and production of this movie. And I also think there are aspects of this movie that are clearly drawn from a workshop meeting where they're like, what do we want this to be? And clearly there is just so much, let's make Stranger Things with a robot as part of Bumblebee, where you just have to roll your eyes. You can imagine that like workshop meeting where they sit down and like, hey, do 80s nostalgia, bring in a feisty young female character and a guy that has a crush on her and your robots. Just like, I get it, dude. Just drop it. Be your own thing. It doesn't have its own identity, is what I'm trying to get to. It tries to be either a Transformers movie or a Stranger Things with a robot ripoff. It never has enough confidence to be itself. And there are moments where it does have confidence to stand on its own. That's when the movie works. There's not enough of them for me.
Yeah, I agree.
And from there, we don't know what is going to happen. There is another prequel coming to theaters this weekend, directed by Stephen Caple Jr., who last made the very underrated Creed 2.
You talked earlier about sort of the cartoons falling off the map and the whole thing, but there was, in the 90s, I didn't watch it. I wasn't the audience at the time, but there was like a low key CG series called Transformers Beast Wars, which does have a dedicated fandom, which was relatively well received as far as those things go. And that's kind of the source of, the story for this new Transformers movie. How that's articulated in the movie, I don't know. We've certainly seen that this movie is like, let's do a lot of robots. And so and kind of new human characters. So I'm concerned that a lot of the problems that we've seen in previous movies are just going to be replicated here, but we'll see.
We'll find out this Friday with Transformers Rise of the Beasts. Romeo, Russ, thank you so much for joining us here once again on the Box Office Podcast. This show is produced by Box Office Pro in collaboration with the Box Office Studios, Box Office Network, and Record Edit Podcast. Join us again next week for another episode. Bye-bye.